Text by S.E. Hinton, Chapter 4, Part 1. What a come down. Jamie hung over the back of our seat and mocked us. Having to ride the bus like other mere mortals. A whole week, too, Johnny grumbled. No cycle for a whole week. At least Cole didn't howl it off to the junkyard like he threatened to at first. Bob's lucky. Mason can give him a ride. Yeah, I said, if he wants to get there an hour early and stay 2 hours late. Mace is getting to be a fanatic about basketball. Johnny sighed. Having a cycle at our school, where not too many people had them, really had done a lot for his ego. You bring any snakes or frogs today, Tex? He asked. Nope, everything is hibernating. There's nothing to do. We already liberated the ant colony, and it's too cold for a water gun war. Aren't you in enough trouble? Jamie asked. Johnny shrugged. I don't know. I'm just so sick of Cole bossing me around. I feel like really giving him something to worry about. Jamie settled back in her seat. You can always go out and get drunk again. That worked real well. Johnny didn't look too inclined to take that suggestion. I didn't tell him my idea for finishing my art project. I could tell it would just make him glum for not being able to do it himself. I usually like art class. Most of the time I draw horses, which I happen to be real good at, or paint landscapes, which I can do well enough. Mostly I get C's in art, though, because Mrs. Germany counts off for behavior. The last 3 weeks had been driving me crazy. We were supposed to be making a free-form sculpture by gluing toothpicks together. Some of the kids really got off on that. I'm not much on free-form sculpture. As a matter of fact, the whole project bored me out of my mind until the last few days, when I thought of how I was going to finish it. I went nuts gluing toothpicks, used lots of glue. Now I had a huge sticky mess about 3 feet high. Today is the final day of this project, Mrs. Germany announced. Thank the Lord, I whispered, and the girl sitting at the next table giggled. I'll be passing by each desk during the hour to give you your final grade on it, so have it ready. I was ready. When she got to the table just before mine, I set a match to my pile of toothpicks and jumped back as the flames shot up. Grade it! Quick! Grade it! I hollered. I thought I'd crack up at the look on her face. Then she just stood there, watched it, wrote a grade down in her little book, and said, Texas, make sure it's out before you go see Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson was the vice principal and guidance counselor, and she was also the person to see when you got in trouble. Mrs. Johnson wasn't real surprised to see me. I'd been to her office before. I got the usual lecture and a swat with the Board of Education. That's what Mrs. Johnson called it. And finally she said, Let's not see you in here again, Texas. Not this year anyway, I said. Maybe not any more this month. Try to stay away until next week anyway. I nodded and waved as I left. Mrs. Johnson was real nice. I know that sounds funny coming from me, but since I was the next to the most swatted kid in the school, Roger Jennett was the most, but he was mean. I always knew when I was doing something I could get swatted for. It was never any big surprise. See, Mrs. Johnson might swat me once in a while, but she always asked me how we were getting along, if we'd heard from Pop, and once she told me about some trouble Mason had been in when he was my age that I had never heard anything about from anyone else. She'd always say hi to me in the halls, and when I came to school after that fight me and Mason had, she spent 5 minutes trying to find out what happened. I wouldn't tell. And then another 5 telling me the best thing to do for a black guy. If you get the feeling somebody cares about what happens to you, then you don't mind it if they swat you once in a while. It just wasn't my day. Miss Carlson asked me to stay after English class. Tex, you can't do 2 book reports on Smokey the Cow Horse. But I read it 2 times. I didn't tell her I'd read it 2 times last year too. Smokey the Cow Horse was my favorite book. It had some real good pictures in it too. Why don't you read another book by the same author? You mean the same person might have wrote something else? I don't know why I never thought of that. I guess I figured writing 1 book ought to last somebody a lifetime. I don't know how they sat still that long. The 2-page book report wore me out. Written. Miss Carlson was always correcting our grammar. She was pretty young for a teacher. I don't know. Once they get past 20, it's hard to tell how old they are, unless they're really old. Yes, Will James wrote several books. He did his own illustrations too. I think you'd enjoy Lone Cowboy. Tex, have you ever thought about writing poetry? Poetry, holy cow. I glanced around to make sure nobody had heard her say that. What had I ever done to Miss Carlson think I ought to write poetry? No, I said finally. You might be good at it. Until you hand in another book report, I'll have to put down an incomplete for your grade. Okay, I'll do you another one, I said hastily. I was anxious to get out of there, not because of her or what she was talking about, even though the poetry thing shook me. I really meant to get that book out of the library, but I was on my way to gym and I didn't want to be late. I hated gym. In some classes, the teacher is mean to everybody. I can take that. And in some classes, the teacher likes a couple of kids and it's nice to them, and everybody else can go jump in the lake. That's easy to live with too. But sometimes a teacher has it in just for one or two people, and I never liked that, even before I was one of the one or two people. Coach McCullough had it in for me because I wouldn't go out for basketball. He had it in his head that I could be the next McCormick basketball hero, another Mace the Ace. He took a lot of credit for Mason's playing, even though Mace didn't really get going good until high school. I would have rather gone out for track, but not going out for anything was the thing that would bug Coach most. So that's what I did. I love to bug people like him. That day got off to a flying start, me coming in late. Then I had to do more push-ups than anybody else. Then during basketball practice, I copied a Harlem Globetrotters routine and got everybody laughing. Then I had to go around the track 2 more laps than everybody else did. Then I got a lecture on getting a new gym shirt since mine was torn up pretty bad. That wasn't too surprising since, like most of my clothes, it'd been worn by Mason before me. Then Coach got down to what he really wanted to say. You know what your trouble is, Mace? You have no competitive spirit. You know what your trouble is, Mac? You have no competitive spirit. The way he said it, not having any competitive spirit, was like not having the sense God gave a goat. Well, maybe he was right. I don't know that much about it. If you didn't have the potential, he went on, I wouldn't care what kind of lazy turkey you were, but you could be just as good a player as Mason if you'd cut the crap and work at it. I staggered back in mock amazement, almost knocking Johnny over. Not that good, I exclaimed. Coach clenched his fist like he was trying to keep from belting me. Everybody held their breath for a second, waiting for him to do it. I thought he'd do that or tell me to touch my toes for a swat. He didn't swat you like Mrs. Johnson did. Coach's swats would lift you off the ground. For an endless minute, we stood like that. Then he said, showers. Everybody took off. I did too, but not as fast as most people. Man, Tex, I thought you'd had it, Johnny said later. I dried my hair off and flipped him with the towel. Nah, he sounds worse than he is. Maybe you shouldn't keep pushing him like that. I looked up from pulling on my boots. Johnny's freckled face looked serious. Hey, I said, what's with you? Johnny had been edgy ever since he got grounded, and I had put up enough with edgy people. You're starting to sound like Cole. Yeah, well, what's wrong with that? For Pete's sake, you've been griping about him for days now. Now it sounds like you're starting to take what he says about the evil McCormicks serious. Just leave Cole out of this, okay? He's my father. I can bitch about him if I want. Bitch about your own, if you ever see him again. For a second, I really thought I was going to jump up and punch his lights out. It must have showed on my face because he went charging out of the locker room. I sat there, holding one boot. Having a fight with Johnny was like seeing the sky turn orange. I couldn't believe it had happened. We didn't speak to each other the rest of the week. When he got his cycle back, he didn't come by to pick me up for school. It was serious. I kept up a good front at school. If he didn't care if we were ever friends again, I didn't. But at home, I moped around a lot. I had plenty of people to talk to at school. But just because you know a lot of people doesn't make them your friends. I felt like I did when I found out Negrito was gone. And I had the weirdest feeling that if Johnny hadn't been fighting with Cole, he wouldn't be fighting with me.